Production and distribution of City Club Forums on IdeaStream is made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club, and I should mention too, given the topic of our conversation today, that I was also a living liver donor back in 2003. The living part is a little redundant, isn't it? And that's kind of why it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here to today's conversation on the unsung heroes of organ, eye, and tissue donation and transplantation. This is our small way here at the City Club of celebrating National Donate Life Month and also to point to this summer's Transplant Games, which will be hosted here in Cleveland. That's happening in June. The Donate Life Transplant Games of America, they're a biennial multi-sport festival featuring 3,000 athletes connected to transplant, donors, recipients, advocates, family members, all competing in 20 different events. And it provides the perfect backdrop to discuss the state of organ, eye, and tissue donation and transplantation here in Northeast Ohio. I want to provide some numbers that will illustrate the current state of things. According to the United Network of Organ Sharing, more than 121,000 Americans are waiting for a life-saving organ transplant today. More than 3,300 are waiting at one of Ohio's 10 transplant centers. And right now, just 56% of Ohio driver's license holders are registered organ and tissue donors, and that's not enough to meet the demand. Every couple of days, an Ohioan dies waiting for an organ transplant that didn't come in time. This isn't just about the numbers, though. These lives of recipients and their living and deceased donors are about connections that are built and never broken. Yesterday here at the City Club in a panel conversation about the future of our city, one of the panelists mentioned the importance of love and affection for our neighbors as being a crucial ingredient in strengthening our cities, and our city, this city in particular. Agreeing to serve as a living donor or a donor in the event of your death, that too is an act of love. Innovations in transplantation, including better and safer surgical techniques for living donors and cutting-edge research in cellular therapy and the 3D printing of organs, could revolutionize the transplant field and make unnecessary living donation and deceased donation. Cleveland was chosen to host the Transplant Games of America partially due to the strength of our healthcare systems and the local transplant programs, many of whose leaders are with us today, to help explore some of the issues related to organ donation and transplant. So with that, let me introduce our panel. Reverend Dr. David Cobb is the pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church, also a kidney recipient. Jillian Frazier is the Director of Development and Community Services for Lifebanc. My friend and my physician, Dr. John Fung, is the Director of Center for Transplantation at the Cleveland Clinic. And Dr. Charles Modlin runs the Minority Men's Health Center, and he's also a kidney transplant surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic as well. It is so good to have all of you here, and I think we're on the verge of educating all of us about a few things here. But Jillian Frazier, can you start us off by kind of talking about the general state of the world of organ donation and transplantation?
Sure. So,
and I'm going to use that now as shorthand for eye, tissue, and organ transplantation. Okay.
Well, Lifebanc is the nonprofit organization here in Northeast Ohio that helps to heal and save lives through organ, eye, and tissue donation for transplantation. And what we are seeing, and you shared some of those statistical numbers, that here in Ohio there is over 3,000 people, near 32 to 3,300 people that are currently waiting for transplants. 1,900 of those folks are right here in Northeast Ohio. What we're seeing is certainly an increase in people having conversations, talking about organ, eye, and tissue donation, considering the option and the ability for each one of us to save and heal lives through the gift of life. Last year, there were over 350 organ donors in the state. But when you think about the number of people that are waiting, clearly you can see the discrepancy in the number of people that are in need and the number of organs available. Those were just organ donors. And then there were another 1,000 tissue donors and another 1,200 corneal donors in the state of Ohio. So we are seeing an increase in people giving the gift, but it's still not enough, and that's our work to continue to educate and provide outreach to the community so that people are saying yes to being able to save and heal other people's lives.
Dr. Fung, can you talk about the state of things from the surgical point of view and the evolution of transplant from the surgical point of view?
Sure, happy to do that, Dan. In fact, I just came back from AP anatomy class at Chagrin Falls High School this morning, where I gave an hour talk about the history of transplantation. And you have to remember, liver organ transplantation, the first successful one was only 60 years ago, in 1954. And really, up into the mid-1960s, it was a rare transplant that was successful. And even when I started doing transplants in 1984, when cyclosporin was just approved by the FDA, more often than not, you got a transplant, you failed.
Cyclosporin is an immunosuppressive?
Yes.
Okay.
And it became the drug that revolutionized transplant, allowed livers and kidneys to be done more routinely, hearts, and then we developed even better immunosuppressive agents. And now the expectation is that better than 90% of patients will have, at 1 year, will be alive and have successfully undergone a transplant. So that's a combination of the medical advances.
90%. I just want to sit with that for a second. 90% after 1 year.
90% of the patients should be alive at 1 year.
Wow.
And that means that if you get through the first year, you're probably going to get to the 5-year mark. You're going to probably get to the 10-year mark. Okay. So, but that's a marked contrast now to what things were like 50 years ago, even, where maybe 1 or 2 or 3 out of 10 patients survived at 1 year. So that's a combination of medical advances, surgical technique, the immunosuppressive drugs that we have, and just the fact that we've been able to, through better organ quality and managing our donors better, getting the combination of the right organ to the right patient, hopefully at the right time. But unfortunately, as you said, about 10% of the waiting list dies every year.
This was 13 years ago when I donated my liver. It was still relatively early in living liver donation, right. And I remember that it was the statistics were that 1 in 1,000 people will die, 1 in 1,000 donors would die, and that's because there had been roughly 1,000 and one person had died. Right. Like it was that kind of real. Yeah. What is with live living donors? How are we doing?
So that in liver transplant, unlike kidney, and I'm sure Dr. Modlin can tell you more about that. But for living liver donors, it's still a risky operation. And 1 in 1,000, probably they kind of pull the wool over your head. It's probably closer to 1 out of 300, 1 out of 400 patients die, donors die. So it's a risky operation. Having said that, we do our best to screen the patients. I think the incidence of complications have dropped off. And it's because the number of centers that are actually doing these risky operations have gotten smaller. And as a result, I think that we're probably looking now about 1 in 1,000. Mm-hmm. We've reduced it, but that's still in contrast to kidney donors, where it's about 3 or 4 times safer than living liver donor.
Can you follow up on that, Dr. Modlin?
There have been a lot of advances in the field of kidney transplantation. First, I wanted to say I'm actually very proud to be sitting next to this guy. He heads up our entire Cleveland Clinic transplant enterprise. Very modest, incredible researcher also. There have been many advances in kidney transplantation. Historically, most of the donors came from deceased donors. And, we're talking about the impact or the significance or importance of living donation. We've seen an increase over the past several years in living kidney donation, primarily due to advances in surgical techniques, namely laparoscopic, minimally invasive living donation. Historically, when we used to have to do the open technique, patients who donated would be in the hospital 3 weeks, for example, recovering, or they'd be off work for several months. And now, a lot of times, after this new refined laparoscopic technique, patients are discharged from the hospital in 1 or 2 days. So a lot of refinements. It's actually a very low risk to the donor. Mm-hmm. We carefully select individuals who can actually be living donor, kidney donors, to make sure that they themselves will not be at increased risk for kidney failure themselves.
Dr. Modlin, there was another question I wanted to ask you as well. Why aren't we getting enough donors? Why aren't there enough organs for people who need them?
Well, there are many reasons behind that, and Dr. Cobb can actually comment on that as well. There are many personal reasons, and in many situations, individuals don't realize that there's an opportunity for them to be living donors. Many individuals don't know that living donation even exists. There's a particular problem, even more pronounced in the African American and other minority communities, with respect to access to living donation. Typically, when you need a kidney donor or living donor, you go out and ask your friends, families, your spouse, your loved ones. But in the case of the Black community, many of the potential living donors themselves are afflicted or at risk for developing kidney disease. The leading causes of kidney disease being diabetes and hypertension. Mm-hmm. So there are some cultural factors that play into the role in terms of people being reluctant to be living donors. A lot of it's education. We need to do more education in the community also. But with respect to kidney transplantation, the results are far superior following living donation as opposed to deceased donation. So we do need to encourage more living donation.
Mm-hmm. Broadly speaking, Dr. Fung, what are the most common organs what are the most common procedures you're doing? Is kidney the most frequently performed transplant?
For solid organs, yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, because you have two kidneys. For livers, it's the second most common.
Surgical humor.
Right.
Everybody's got one to spare.
I know, really. And then hearts and lungs are about tied.
Mm-hmm. And livers.
We do pancreas and intestine transplants also.
Really?
Right, so if anybody has a problem eating today, just come see me, I'll fix it for you.
Great. Pastor Cobb, I want to get to you and your experience here. Tell us the Pastor Cobb's kidney story.
Okay, Pastor Cobb kidney story. I found out in 2000 that I was beginning to suffer from kidney disease, and I would say around 2007 I came to Cleveland, Ohio, and I was actually put on the list to receive a kidney transplant. Met a wonderful lady, Dr. Catcho Bowman, who is back in the back. I know she's kind of embarrassed that I called her name, but she was my doctor during that time, and she really helped me because one of the things, because I'm a pastor, during that time I was able to have home hemodialysis, which really allowed me to continue to pastor and still do the things that I needed to do as it related to dialysis. But on August 29, 2010, I received a transplant successfully, and I'm doing very well. Things are going very well, and I think that it is so important that we continue to tell the story. That's one of the reasons I'm working with Cleveland MOTEP, that's Minority Organ Tissue Transplant Education Program, because I think it's important that we all work together, that we do our part to help people understand the importance and the lives that can be changed, not just that individual, but my family's life has changed, and my church has changed because now I have a working kidney, and I'm just excited and just happy about the cause, and I just want to continue to push.
What do you know about the donor?
Don't know a lot about the donor. I did write a letter to the donor, letting them know just who I was and just how much I appreciated the kidney. The donor actually was a cadaver, and so therefore I didn't get to speak to that person, of course, but I got a chance to write to the family. So I don't know a lot, but The thing that is imprinted in my mind is the importance when you go to the DMV that you do. When they ask, do you want to be an organ donor, that you say yes versus saying no.
Why do people Dr. Modlin mentioned a resistance in the black community to wanting to, even if you are healthy, to wanting to serve as either a living donor or a deceased donor in the untimely event of one's death. What reasons do people give?
I think one of the reasons, or a couple of reasons, if I could go a step further. One is education. We've got to do a better job. And let me just say, we have been doing a better job of educating now. I think a lot of people weren't aware. And also, as pastors now, we began to talk about this not just from a physical standpoint, but talk about it from a spiritual standpoint, and look at the scriptures and begin to see that it is an act of love, it's a gift. And if we are ones who say that we love God, and God was one who gave, and if He gave, then surely those of us who call ourselves of God should give as well, especially if we could help someone to move forward.
Dr. Modlin, is there fear? Is there a fear that's driving that negative response?
Yeah, that's a huge portion of the problem. And we've done a lot of focus groups in the community and received direct feedback. A lot of times people think if they sign that organ donor registration card, if they wind up in the ER or the ICU, that doctors will be body snatchers when trying to get their organs to transplant patients.
Right.
That's not how the system works, by the way.
No, I mean, there's laughter in the room right now because people in healthcare understand how absurd that sounds. Right. But where does that fear, surely that fear must originate somewhere?
I think it emanates from long-standing distrust, especially that a lot of minorities have when it comes to doctors, hospitals, researchers. I'm not sure, most of the people in the room probably have heard about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And even though most of us were not alive in the room when that happened, back in the 30s or 40s or whenever it was, United States Public Health Service actually deliberately denied treatment to about 800 African American males whom they knew had syphilis because they wanted to study the natural consequence of untreated syphilis. That's called the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. And that's really resonated within the minds of the community for all these years. And it's kind of led to a distrust that many people have when it comes to researchers and doctors and hospitals. Mm-hmm. It kind of dictates a lot of times people's fears in terms of even undergoing preventative health screenings.
Have you found success in overcoming those fears?
We've actually spent a lot of time over the past several years at Cleveland Clinic and partnering with the community. Mm-hmm. Many organizations, Lifebanc, MOTEP have been mentioned, and others. Because one thing we found that we have to do in order to engage the community to agree to undergo preventative health screenings to prevent kidney disease and other organ disease, for example, we have to first develop a trusting relationship. Yes. They need to know that we care. I think there was Teddy Roosevelt said it's not enough, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Mm-hmm. That's really true. They have to know that we really care about their overall well-being and their health. And we've actually seen a lot of success in the one particular program that I run, the Minority Men's Health Center. We started back in 2003. We started with a free preventative health screening for all men, but we target minority males. We had 35 men come in the first year. Now we have 2,000 or 3,000 men or more. Wow. The next event's going to be next Thursday, April the 21st. But that's an opportunity to provide preventative care, and I emphasize preventative care. There are many other programs in the community besides mine, but I emphasize preventative care because, again, there's not enough organs, as Jillian said, there's not enough organs to supply the need. And the need is actually ever increasing. It's getting more severe. So we actually have to focus in on prevention and not just increasing the organ donation.
Yeah, it would be nice if there was less of a need.
Right.
Right. Jillian.
We do a lot of education out in the community, and we have sort of the top 5 myths and misconceptions that we continue to work with. Lifebanc has been in existence for 30 years this year, and the myth of they won't save me if I'm a registered organ donor is something that we combat consistently and continue to work. And we're seeing an
What do you
increase.
say? What do you say to people who say that? I mean, do you talk about the Hippocratic Oath? What do you do?
We talk, yes, about that the doctors are there to save your life first and foremost, and that the reality is that the point where donation is an option, it doesn't occur until after
Brain
medical criteria happens and brain death, and the organ procurement organization is not called until every opportunity to save your life has been exhausted. And at that point, if there's an opportunity for donation, that's the point where that option is presented.
Dr. Fung, can you talk about the protocols that exist the sort of between the doctors who are caring for a patient that maybe was in a motorcycle accident, let's say, that's a common example, and your team who is eager to save somebody's life?
Yep. So the good
Somebody
thing is that
else's
they're totally independent. In fact,
Right.
we wouldn't even encounter the primary team, be they medical or surgical or trauma, in taking care of the patient. Because as Jillian said, the primary team taking care of the patient on the time of admission for whatever reason will take care of the patient any way that's indicated, regardless of what the donor status is. At the point that the patient is declared brain dead, or because the family in certain circumstances want to withdraw care, and that's a different type of donor, it's a deceased donor, but called a non-heart beating donor or donation after cardiac death, that patient is then referred directly to the OPO.
What is the OPO?
The OPO is Lifebanc, Organ
Okay.
Procurement Organization, and
Okay.
there are 58 of them in the United States. And they, as Jillian said, have defined protocols they have to adhere to. It's all based on very strict criteria, medically documented criteria, at which point, if we as a transplant team have a donor, or have a recipient that matches that donor and goes through a computer algorithm, then we're contacted. So our only interaction is with the OPO. And so we really do appreciate how the primary team takes care of the patients, we don't have any interaction with them at all. And it should be that way.
Yes. Similarly, with living donation, there are kind of protocols separating. If you're working for if you're the doctor of a donor, you're advocating for that donor, and the recipient has his own doctor.
Right. So there again, now for all living donors, UNOS, United Network for Organ Sharing, has strict criteria for what we call a living donor advocate, and that advocate is somebody not involved in the transplant team at all. In fact, that person is really only designated to look out for the best interests of that donor. And so it's not just medical, it's also psychological, social evaluations that undergo, that the potential donor undergoes in order to qualify. And only at that point does that person interact with the donor surgical team. And that donor advocate stays with the patient and throughout the preoperative and even after surgery in terms of follow-up.
That's true. And what's also true, and what most people don't know, how many living donors are in the room? Round of applause.
That's
great. But what most people who have never been screened to be a living donor or have served as a living donor don't know is that at any point in the process, there's a sort of veil of secrecy over it, and I'm pulling the veil back right now, so all of you know this. But if you were to serve as a living donor, and at some point you have doubts, and you're like, you know what, I can't go through with this. This is too much. It's too risky. I just can't do it. They will contrive a medical reason for you, so that to essentially help you save face. I'm not kidding. I mean and it's not. They'll find something, there will be a reason for you not to have to go through with it. And they really do continue to advocate for you in every way, so that when you're doing it, it's because you feel that you are ready and the doctor feels that you are capable of withstanding the trauma of the surgery.
That's great.
Yeah. Can we get into some of the science now? Like I wanted to clarify one thing, Dr. Modlin. You were talking about laparoscopic surgery for kidneys, for kidney extraction. The holes that you're working with in a laparoscopic situation are smaller than a kidney. So how do you get it out?
Yeah, well, the kidneys sit high in we call it the retroperitoneal space.
That's what I call it too.
Oh, okay. And and there are certain instances where if there are multiple arteries, for example, depending on the anatomy, sometimes we still have to make an open incision, and that usually entails removing a portion of the rib, which can lead to prolonged recovery time. So what is done? Small telescopic ports are inserted into the abdominal cavity, and the kidney is mobilized. Using those instrumentations, looking at a TV screen. But then after the kidney is mobilized,
it sounds like it's going to go protest.
Well, after the kidney is mobilized, the artery and vein are ligated. Then we make a small incision, like a bikini incision, and then actually put the hand in and extract the kidney out that way.
I see.
So you're going through less muscle. You're not having to take out a rib.
Okay,
right.
That's great. We mentioned early on, Dr. Fung, the possibility of 3D printing of organs. People have watched TED Talks about such fantastic occurrences, and also about growing human organs inside of animal models. Can you talk about some of that?
And so it's potentially exciting. I mean, it is exciting. It's potentially possible to envision that happening, but that won't be for years. I mean, if we look at 3D printing now, if you remember that cells have polarity, they have a top side and bottom side. And when you do these 3D printing, you're putting cells in upside down, inside out. I mean, it will take some time for the cells to realign and create a really functional 3D. So right now it's good for, it's a great publicity thing, but it's not ready for prime time yet. But still, having said that, technology will eventually, I think, bring us to a point where we can grow human organs in animals using progenitor cells, or potentially taking a diseased organ, stripping it from the diseased cells and putting healthy cells in. That's already going on in animal models, but not right.
With stem cell technology and...
Yeah, right, exactly, it is. And we call it a decellularization. You take an organ, you take out all the cells, you leave the scaffold, and then you repopulate the scaffold with living cells. It's been done in animals, has been done in humans.
What has it been done? Like, what size animals are we talking about? Mice? Are we talking about pigs? What are we doing?
Pigs.
Up to pigs. Yeah. That's almost human size.
Almost human size, right?
So that's something you see on the horizon.
That'll probably occur before the other two that we talked about, 3D printing and
right. So, but in terms of actually applying it to human pathologies, I mean, it's possible. Right? It's possible.
Yeah.
Wow. Jillian, it'd be nice if Lifebanc went out of business. In that way. I didn't mean it,
Absolutely. And, it's our vision that we're pursuing the day that it's an honor for an individual to be a donor and everyone waiting receives their transplant. And that's our goal. So, yes, if we put ourselves out of business, wouldn't that be amazing? With that being said, I've been at Lifebanc for 9 years, and when I started, the wait list was under 100,000. Mm-hmm. And now it's up to 125,000. So, think about how rapidly it's growing. And let's not forget that this is on the horizon, but we have an opportunity and to initiate that conversation, to talk about it, and to present the option that we really, each one of us has the potential to save and heal a life. And how amazing of a legacy that is.
Mm-hmm. Pastor Cobb, earlier you mentioned that it had changed your family's life, it changed your church's life, mm-hmm. your congregation's life. Can you talk a little bit more about what it really means to have received a kidney?
Yes. What it really means to receive a kidney, number one, your energy level is up. You feel new. You feel like you can climb any mountain. You want to do everything. It is. You feel. I guess for me, I felt like I felt before the whole kidney disease came. I would also say that just as it relates to fatigue, I wasn't as fatigued. I could now, on vacation, I didn't have to take 3 of the days and go to a dialysis center to go in. But if we went to Disney World, I'm there all day now, and the wife loves that. And the kids, they, just simple things.
Do you bring the kids to Disney World?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. but yeah, so I get to do that. I get to be involved. I was involved more now in the church life. The calendar wasn't dictated around my schedule. I'm talking about when I had to put myself on dialysis, but now it's more free. I'm able to, again, events like this, I'm not thinking, okay, at around 3 or 4 o'clock, I need to make sure I'm at home so I can get on the machine. So it's a mindset change, but also it just feels so good physically. And speaking as one who has went through this, it is one of the, it's a miracle. I think that's if I had to just put it in a word, it's a miracle. And I'm just so happy to have a kidney, and for those who have not received a organ or at this time, I would say my thing to them, the thing I learned from that is, even in spite of everything, it was my faith, it was understanding that God still loves me, He still cares, and that no matter what I'm going through, I can still encourage others, I still can be there. And even those who I asked about giving a organ, I can still be there for them, love them in spite of it all, because at the end of the day, I realized that at the proper time, it was going to happen for me. And I'm just so glad it did.
We're about to go to questions from the audience, but before we do, Dr. Fung, Dr. Modlin, I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about the teams that you both work with. There's a number of nurses in the room today, I know, and I know that you can't do what you do without some highly competent talent at your side.
Well, I do kidney transplantation. I'm a urologist also, and I see I see Elaine Beaver here. She's in the back there. She's one of our kidney transplant coordinators. I have a number of my media and marketing individuals here to help us get out and educate the community, and our transplant administrator, Callista, is here. So there are a number of people here in the audience. It's a total team approach, and one thing I wanted to say, not everybody can necessarily qualify medically to be a transplant recipient. Yeah. And so a large part of the work that we do collectively together is to determine which patients would be best suited to receive an organ transplant. Sometimes you don't want to do any harm to the patient, and so sometimes a transplant can actually be more harmful than actually not getting a transplant. So we take great care in terms of evaluating patients, selecting the right patients, because again, there's a scarcity of organs. We want to make sure those organs are going to the right patients, because we can't afford to waste those organs. The other thing is, the process doesn't end once you receive a transplant. There's a long, arduous process. Pastor Cobb actually has to do a lot of work on a daily basis. He has to take those medications every single day religiously, otherwise he will have a rejection. So no, it is a team approach, and I'm actually just proud to be part of the team. I'd like to thank also Bill Ryan for actually bringing the National Transplant Games here to Cleveland to raise awareness of the great needs.
Let's go to questions from the audience. Let me just remind everybody and those of you who are joining us on YouTube. Today we are enjoying a panel conversation on the unsung heroes of organ, eye, and tissue donation and transplantation, featuring Reverend Dr. David Cobb, pastor at Emmanuel Baptist Church and a kidney recipient, Jillian Frazier of Lifebanc, Dr. John Fung, who directs the Cleveland Clinic Center for Transplantation, and Dr. Charles Modlin, director of the Minority Men's Health Center and a kidney transplant surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic as well. As I said, we're about to begin the Q&A. We welcome questions from all of you, City Club members and guests alike, as well as students. Welcome to all of you. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will work it into the program. We'd like to remind you, too, that your questions should be brief and to the point. Holding our microphones today are our Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky, and our Marketing and Outreach Fellow, Faye Walker. May we have our first question, please?
Hello, everyone. My name's Rachel. I'm with the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission, and I've been inspired by working on the Transplant Games of America here in Cleveland and recently joined the National Registry of Bone Marrow Donors. And it made me wonder, you were talking about kidneys and how everyone's got two. Is there a National Registry of Kidney Donors? I mean, I realize there's more involved medically, but could I not be on a list to say I might, if called?
Yeah, actually, there is a national registry, and there is a national registry, and actually over the past several years, Cleveland Clinic has actually joined a special program. It's an organ swap or exchange program. If you, for instance, have somebody who wants to give you a kidney, but they're not compatible, they actually can go on that list to give to somebody else, and then their individual can give to you. There can be a long chain also, but we've increased the number of living donors that way as well.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to say, I didn't miss you, Donna Furchel is one of our transplant coordinators here as well.
It's tough when you start naming the
Right.
individuals and then you're going to leave somebody out. It's hard.
Right.
It's like the Oscars problem.
Hi, my name's Rachel Summer. I was fortunate enough to be able to donate a kidney to my daughter when she was 2 years old, but I know not everybody's that fortunate. And one of the things Dr. Modlin talked about, the medical side of making sure a patient is eligible. Well, there's another side as well, and Dr. Modlin and I have talked about this, but I thought it might be helpful for the group to realize, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the need for patients to have support and the different pieces that are involved in eligibility to receive a transplant. And when we have communities that are very disenfranchised, they don't always have the support they need from family and friends to help them during and after that process. And what can we do as citizens, service providers, to make sure that we're making the opportunity to receive organs more equitable for all of our people?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, that's a very complex problem that we face in the transplant community. Not only do we have to make sure people are medically suitable, but socially, psychologically suitable to not only receive it, also manage and maintain the organ. Some of the most vulnerable populations are minority populations, which is becoming even more of a problem given the fact that the demographic in this nation is rapidly changing. I think in the next 20, 30 years or so, minorities will actually assume the majority position, and so minorities have higher rates of all kinds of conditions, and so you can kind of surmise and understand this is going to be even a growing problem. We call these the social determinants of health that you speak of. Some people don't have the support systems, transportation. Some people don't have access to getting the medications that we prescribe. Some of these transplant medications, Pastor Cobb can attest to, cost maybe $1,000 a month or more. And so when we evaluate patients to determine if they can receive transplants, they undergo a thorough, extensive social work evaluation. And it's important that we do make sure there is some kind of support system, because again, we have actually a responsibility as healthcare providers to make sure that organ is going to last as long as it can. But it's a major problem. We need to partner with outside organizations to help solve this problem.
Dr. Modlin, what happens if a patient is too poor to be able to afford the medications post-surgery?
Yeah, some of these pharmaceutical companies have very generous charity assistance programs to help bridge the gap. Our transplant coordinators spend most of the time, and our social workers, working out those details. That's why I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge them. Unfortunately, there are some instances where patients are denied opportunities to receive transplants if we feel that they won't have access to any medications whatsoever. The other thing is sometimes we can give them more generic medications, which we feel are suitable and adequate, but they're not necessarily the newer generation medications, immunosuppressive medications.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Fung, do you have anything to add to that?
This is a challenge, I think, for healthcare in the United States, maybe less so now with the Affordable Care Act, but still there are populations of people in the United States that are not able to access transplantation because of lack of the resources. And even though we're very blessed in Ohio to have had Medicaid expansion for many of our patients, and so within Ohio it's rare to get a patient who can't qualify for transplant because of financial status. We know several in the surrounding states that have not adopted Medicaid expansion that we can't accept them. So it is a challenge, and it's a broader social problem than it is just related to transplant, but it's highlighted in transplant because it is a life or death kind of thing, and unfortunately we're stuck in the middle, trying to adjudicate that when it really should be a societal answer.
Yeah. Rachel, your question touched on support for patients, both donors and recipients, and I would be extremely remiss if I didn't recognize my mother sitting at the back, who cared for me for about 4 weeks. Who's now going to ask a question?
As the mother of a living donor who was prepared to give my liver should he need it at the time, is there an age at which one can no longer be considered as a living donor or whose organs are no longer usable?
Well, that's a good question. So because we're talking about Dan's liver and the fact that you had volunteered to be a living liver donor for him if something happened. The reality is that, we know the liver can grow back. It's an amazing organ. There is a time relationship to the ability for the liver to regenerate. So it would be almost unheard of in a young, 20-year-old not to get full regeneration. Once you get to be in the 60s and 70s, there is a single-digit risk for the liver not to be able to grow back sufficiently. So we do have a sort of arbitrary but still rational kind of decision that at 55 or maybe at 60, but once you get past 60, most programs would not consider that because of that risk. I mean, to put an older recipient at risk for liver failure after that liver donation would probably be unacceptable.
And we've taken kidney donors up into the 70s before, but again, there is some potential risk, and we have to be very careful about doing that.
I guess I would also just interject, because one thing we see when we're monitoring the donor registration rates is that we start seeing people self-selecting to decline to be a registered donor because they think they're too old or they're too sick. And one of our education pieces is don't rule yourself out. If you want to be considered to give the gift of life, please designate your wishes, talk to your loved ones, so that upon your death there is the opportunity for evaluation as to whether or not that your organs, corneals and tissues could go on to save and heal another life. And there have been some unique cases where some very senior folks have been able to be a donor and help to save someone. I believe that it was a gentleman that was in his 90s.
Yeah. So I did want to clarify. Yeah. What we talked about was living donors, because deceased donors, there is no age limit. And I think the actual record for a deceased donor, liver donor, was 97.
Oh my gosh.
So it's really how well you take care of yourself before you die, and there are lots of factors that go into it, but don't rule yourself out because of the age. That's not an appropriate limitation.
Just don't go anywhere anytime soon, Mom. But also to clarify, I mean, we've been spending a lot of time talking about liver and kidney, but in your world, Jillian, right. I mean, there's almost nothing that can't be donated.
Oh, well, there are organs, your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, your pancreas, your intestine. There's an opportunity, but also tissue and bone, corneals, and actually now nerves. And there's amazing things. I think I had mentioned to you before, I'm incredibly inspired every day going to work and seeing these stories and looking at in awe of what medical science, the human body and human spirit are capable of. I mean, it's really incredible. And for us too, we have the opportunity to interact with donor families. Let's talk about some unsung heroes, right? These individuals who had a time in their life where they've experienced horrific tragedy and unexpected death that has happened, and they have honored their loved ones' wishes and or made the decision to donate at that time. And what they tell us is that it has been a part of their own healing to know that their loved one's legacy lives on, and to have the experience of someone like Reverend Cobb to receive a letter from them saying, because of your loved one, I'm here. I'm still able to pastor, to share my work, to be there, to go to Disneyland with my kids.
If that's your thing, she's not judging.
But to have that opportunity and to be able to have that experience, and that's absolutely amazing. And when we talk about our mission of saving and healing lives, we talk about that healing piece is not just the healing of the recipient, but the healing of the donor family as well.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Jillian. It's it's important. Who's next? Yeah.
I'm John Sharp, and I wanted to give a plug to the HLA labs, the testing labs. My sister works at one in Emory University, and she told me about a program of multiple organ donations occurring at the same time, coordinated. I'm not sure what the right term is. Can you talk about that, and has that been done in Cleveland, and how successful that kind of program is?
And what does HLA stand for?
Human leukocyte antigen.
Oh, thank you. Well done, sir.
It's basically tissue typing.
Okay.
All right. But I think Charles can, Dr. Modlin can talk about it.
You're talking about the National Kidney Registry. I kind of referenced it a little bit earlier, where individuals who have prospective or potential donors, if they're not compatible, then they actually can go on this national registry, and then there can be several chains where individuals can actually swap kidneys with other individuals who have incompatible donors. We've been doing it for the past several years. Our program is actually headed up by Dr. Stuart Fleckner. We've had a lot of great results, and it's really increased the number of kidney living transplants that we've been able to perform, get people off the waiting list. Whenever we can do a living kidney transplant, you have to understand that gives somebody else an opportunity on the waiting list to get a deceased donor kidney. So it's very important that program exists.
I just want to make a plug because Ohio was the first state, in fact, that piloted this paired kidney exchange.
Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Sally Coburn. I'm an organ donor mom and special events director for Transplant Games of America. And my question is relative to living donors and what insurance companies are doing to support the living donors, and also employers in terms of time off for recovery. Could you speak to that in Ohio?
Well, I know for kidneys, the recipient insurance company actually pays the expenses for the living donor. In many instances, travel, hotel costs, things like that. I haven't actually personally seen any cases where donors have actually been denied an opportunity to donate. I mean, the transplant coordinators would know more about that than I would. But I think it's important that actually we educate not only the community but also the corporate world to understand the importance of this and to support this as well. Living donation.
Yeah, I would just say it's not universal. We do have patients whose as recipients won't cover the donor. It's increasingly rare, but it still occurs. I think the challenge is to, part of this is the quality of the plan that the recipient has. And I think more and more as the restrictions for, the quality health plan and the services provided that are required by the health plan increase and become more uniform, but I think that will those instances should become even rarer, but it still occurs. And most companies, I would say, that are pretty good in terms of providing time off, but it's not, again, not universal.
There was also legislation that was passed under 10 years ago, but that there is up to a $10,000 tax credit for a living donor to help in offsetting the costs that they may have occurred that wouldn't be covered by insurance, travel, time off.
Is that retroactive? Can I?
Sorry.
I would say, too, though, to your point, in 13 years since I donated, I've never been denied coverage for the pre-existing condition of missing part of my liver, and I think, and nor was I denied life insurance. So I got a pretty decent rate, right? So it means, I think a lot of the insurers see that the fact that you can serve as a living donor is a sign of your vitality, robust health, or something.
Well, I can attest to that. You're in great shape then. I should be so lucky.
Dan, I think we can make some City Club history tonight. Today, my name is Ron Kisner. I'm O negative. I see Dr. Fung and Dr. Modlin here. This looks like a very healthy crowd. We could find a room out there. Just go in and make this happen. In about 20 minutes, we get to have it done. Dr. Modlin, if you would address this. One of the things you said about one of the things that prohibits minority donations is the health of the potential donator, that the donor himself or herself may not be in adequate health. And I wondered if you could address maybe some of the lifestyle issues that a potential donor needs to be ascribing to.
I think, Ron, they may have missed the fact that you're waiting for a kidney transplant.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. How many? Do we have others who are awaiting transplant in the room? Okay.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Modlin.
Well, I mean, like I said, especially in the minority communities, we have what we call, we're more prone to developing what we call health disparities. Just means a disproportionate burden of disease actually impacts minority populations. Higher rates of hypertension, diabetes especially contribute to the greater incidence of kidney disease. And again, what we need to do is center around focusing in on encouraging these populations to undergo routine preventative health screenings to establish care with a primary care provider. A lot of these conditions, you don't have to have any symptoms whatsoever to have severe diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, kidney disease. They're very easy screening tests to identify a lot of these conditions. With kidney disease, for example, simple blood tests, we can check the urine, whether or not there's any blood or protein. But really, I mean, there are a lot of, you talked about, what potential lifestyle factors contribute to, the disproportionate incidence of disease. It's not only necessarily lifestyle, but a lot of it's hereditary as well, combined with lifestyle. A lot of it's the types of foods that we eat, high salt intake, physical inactivity can contribute, but we have to make sure that we don't necessarily blame those individuals, because many individuals live in areas where, for instance, they may be living in food deserts, for example. They may not have access to proper nutrition. They may live in a very dangerous environment where they can't necessarily go out and exercise on a routine basis. A lot of things that we need to take into consideration. But it is a growing problem because, like I said, a greater percentage of the United States population is minority. So we're just going to see an increasing percentage of the population prone to these conditions.
I have this quick question though. Why do we do this at the DMV? Why does this whole organ donation thing happen with the Department of Motor Vehicles and not with your primary care physician? And in an era when we're all moving towards what's ultimately going to be a universal electronic medical record, why wouldn't it be there?
Well, because the state owns the donor registry. There's a misconception that Lifebanc owns the donor registry. We do not. It is part of. It's a statewide registry, and it's there because so many people go to the state. To get your driver's license, to get your state ID. And we have, in the state of Ohio, almost 68% of licensed drivers and state ID holders are saying yes. And when you say yes and you designate your wishes to be considered for a donation, that's considered an advanced medical directive. And it's a legal document that you're saying you want it to happen. But make sure you have the conversation with your family as well. You can imagine when someone is a potential candidate for donation, we really hope that that's not the first time that conversation has ever happened amongst your family, because the reality is the need is so great that we as Lifebanc or the organ procurement organization designated to the service area in which an individual is, that they're required by law to go in and offer the opportunity for donation. And so, again, we don't want that to be the first time you've ever heard about it, thought about it, or had that conversation with your family, that it's an opportunity for you.
Great.
So you all mentioned that education is key to increase awareness. So what are some of the examples of programs or initiatives or campaigns that you have going on to increase the awareness, especially in the minority population?
For the church, one of the things that we're doing is we have, like for this month, we have for Minority Health Month, we have doctors who come in to the church to explain about taking care of yourself, and also we have classes that go on throughout the month. But now one of the things that we've started to do is to have healthy eating, healthy cooking classes that people go to, and it's become, I've worked with now, I think it's about 9 or 10 churches now that operate with this program, where we go in and we talk about how to cook better, and also just things like high blood pressure, and begin to talk about what are some things that we can do to begin to change the statistics. And so in the religious community, we've also partnered with the medical community, working together with Cleveland Clinic and UH here to begin to let's talk about what are we dealing with on the in the religious world, and how is it that the medical world, how can we come together so that the people can begin to benefit. So that's what we've been doing from that area.
Lifebanc does a significant amount of education, so do our partners at Everside, Ohio, and MOTEP, reaching out into the community. We really try to take an approach that this is a medical issue, but it's really a community issue. It really is. I mean, the reality is that when we walk into a room, it is not uncommon that we start our presentation and we ask, does anyone know someone that's been touched by organ, eye, and tissue donation and transplantation? And people look around and they look, and then I start seeing people digging in their purse, and they're looking to pull out their driver's license to show us that yes, they're a registered donor, or that by the end of the conversation they're saying, oh yeah, wait, I do know somebody, my neighbor down the street, or that lady that has the cubicle in the office, they were waiting, or they have a loved one or a friend or a family member that's been a donor. And so we do education in high schools and driver's education. We do work partnerships, we call it Community Champion, where we try to ask workplaces to let us come in and talk about it, because again, this is really something that's going to have the potential to impact everyone. It's anyone, anytime, anywhere that could potentially be a donor or be in need. Not everybody has a long-term medical condition that has positioned them that they're going to need a transplant. Sometimes it can be a relative surprise, and we hear stories about that all the time. So we do a lot of education out there and try to do partnerships to reach out. Bringing the Transplant Games to Cleveland was really one of those pieces in a campaign that is huge to our community, to get the word out, to have people beyond just our medical professionals, who are absolutely key and important. And again, this is really a community issue and something that we need to get out there. So we're working hard to get there.
And efforts like this, of course, are part of that. And this is on YouTube, so if you've got people you want to share it with, it's an educational resource available to everybody, to the entire community. Jillian, Frazier, Pastor Cobb, Dr. Fung, Dr. Modlin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
A couple of final items here, just to remind you, today at the City Club we've been enjoying a panel conversation on the unsung heroes of organ, eye, and tissue donation and transplantation. Today's forum is sponsored by the Cleveland Clinic. Thank you so much. part of our Healthcare Innovation Series. Special thanks also to our table sponsors, the Cleveland Clinic Heart-Lung Transplant Team, Cleveland MOTEP, the Donate Life Transplant Games of America, Eversight, the Cleveland Eye Bank Foundation, that's Eversight, Ohio, the Cleveland Eye Bank Foundation, Lifebanc, and the Center for Health Affairs. Lastly, student participation from St. Ignatius High School was made possible by a generous grant from the Lobb Foundation. We thank you for your support. And a final note, too, whenever I mention that I was a liver donor, people always want to know how the recipient's doing. She's great. She lives in Pacific Northwest, and she's thriving. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our forum is now adjourned. Good job. Don't get up, don't get up. You got
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club Forums on IdeaStream is made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.